So I had a few questions about old champagnes, and I'm about to publish some tasting notes on some very old champagnes in the Wine Advocate. So I wanted to say a few words about them today. Champagne to me is a wine that ages unlike pretty much all other wines because of two things really, the bubbles and the sugar. The sugar, just added sugar, whether it's cane sugar or beet sugar or rectified grape must, reacts with amino acids in the wines over time. There's sort of Maillard-like reactions. Maillard reactions are the reactions that create the caramelized aromas and flavors of grilled meat, for example, or the empyromatic aromas of roasted coffee beans. Those reactions take place in champagne. You also have perforals, which are produced by the breakdown of those added sugars also over time, which contribute these sort of caramelized characteristics. Whereas a still dry wine ages in quite a slow, consistent way, unless there's, of course, some sort of issue, whether with the closure or the wine itself, how it's made. Champagne, by contrast, goes along and then suddenly begins to develop these very toasted, nutty, roasted, brioche aromas, especially if the dosage is quite elevated. There are a lot of things that influence this. What kind of liqueur de gorgement is used, what it contains, what sorts of sugar, and the chemistry, I think, is very complex. It's being studied quite a lot at the moment, but I suspect we're only ever going to have a sort of partial and rather empirical understanding of the levers that can be pulled to create different sort of flavors in mature champagnes. Now, some people, there are some lovers of old champagnes who are relatively indiscriminate, and I think love champagne for what it is. I would describe myself as a wine lover who likes champagne when it's great wine. And to me, there has to be some sort of vinosity, some sort of grape-derived character, as well as those sort of artifacts of the process, because some of these very old champagnes, when they've lost all of their bubbles, begun to oxidize and have all of this sort of residual sugar-derived chemistry going on, tastes more to me like a confectioner's experiment than great wine. For me also, I'd say that the bubbles are important. Most champagnes, at least from the olden days, were very much conceived as sparkling wines by the people who made them, and it stands to reason that that's an important component of defining a component of their identity and how they're supposed to taste. And that's difficult because, the rule of thumb is that champagne loses 1 atmosphere of pressure every decade, and, normally starts out with around 4. So quite rapidly, the champagnes do begin to degas. It's also, I think, as soon as the CO2 is gone, a very fragile wine, much more fragile than, say, white Burgundy, and certainly one of the most susceptible to any kind of damage in transit or storage. So the result for me is that while I adore old champagne when it's good, when it's fresh, when it has vinosity, when it's not too sort of oxidized, caramelized in its flavor profile, and when it has some bubbles, that's actually quite a hard experience to find. I would say that by a lot of old wines, I've had more disappointments and mistakes, even from cold cellars, good conditions with champagne and anything else. So I'm going to tempt Providence today. I have a 1964 Philipponnat, and it's just the cuvée Royale Réserve, which is now a non-vintage cuvée, but was vintage back then. And we're going to see. Actually, I don't know if the microphone picked that up, but there was actually a little sound. So I think maybe we got lucky. It's from a cold cellar in northern France. And when you're serving old champagne, it makes sense. See, there's just a vestigial, really very vestigial mousse. People talk about the mousse being pearly, and you can see it's really at that stage. So there's only a tiny amount of gas, but it still looks pretty fresh. When you're serving a wine like this, I'd say it's important to have very clean glasses and to serve it maybe a bit colder than you would a young champagne, not palate-numbingly cold, but obviously the colder the wine is, the more slowly it degasses. And then keep it closed. I used champagne stoppers because I steal them all over the region. This one I stole from Champagne Bollinger. Thank you, Champagne Bollinger. But you can also use a cork quite adequately, in fact. And let's see. Yeah, it definitely has some other sort of caramelized, roasted notes, but not to the exclusion of quite a lot of sort of ripe, honeyed orchard fruit. It's pretty good. It's, not a life-changing wine, but there's definitely enough residual gas to make it quite distinct from the still wine that isn't flat. I wouldn't have minded more bubbles, I would say. You can still find champagne from the 60s, from the 50s. Even original disgorgements will have a very healthy mousse, healthier than this. But it's a pretty nice wine. And I think at least has aged in a very graceful way, particularly for a wine which it's not Clos de Gouaz. It's one of the more modest cuvées from Philipponnat in that era.